The final installment of the 2024 Top Buffs Countdown. William and I had to get together to do this in person here at the Boulder Public Library. They've got some pretty cool conference rooms that you can just kind of set up and do your podcast in.
Yeah, so plus I think he likes the physical aspect, get up in his face and all that kind of stuff from last time.
We almost rebranded the podcast last time as a result of that. Yeah. But the anticipation has been building for the end of this countdown. I've had quite a few people ask me when we're going to do this, so it's good to get together and jump in. And we've got 9 guys left in this year's countdown. If you haven't watched our previous episodes, I highly recommend go back and watch them. We even talked about honorable mention guys that didn't make the list, but we expect to have an impact on this program this year. And it really has highlighted the improved depth on this football team. So it's been a fun exercise this summer. But these are the guys that, this is kind of entering into all conference caliber potential guys, right? Now, I feel, as we get in the top 10.
And higher. I mean, at least a couple of Heisman candidates. And some of these guys may be higher than that. Coach Prime's talked about 4 first-round draft picks. I'd have to think you get some recognition in the season if you're going to get that high.
Yeah. Well, let's go to number 9, and that's where edge player Dayon Hayes comes in. I had him 10th on my list. William, you had him here at 9th, and Brian at 13th. He was a blue-chip guy coming out of high school in Pittsburgh, stayed home and played 30 games with the Panthers before deciding that he was going to hit the transfer portal, and he was highly productive, 44 quarterback pressures last year. Colorado only had one player on their defense last year that had more than 20.
Right.
That was Jordan Dominic.
Right.
This year they're going to have 3, and Dayon that had more than 20 last year at their previous school, and Dayon Hayes is one of them.
Yeah, and I think he's one of those guys that really is a game changer in terms of what he does in the defense, and they're going to be another one in that similar situation we're going to talk about here in a minute. But Dayon Hayes is a guy that, when you have a dangerous pass rush, it changes what other offenses do. They have to change their play calling, and it has to change their protections and what have you. And if you got one on one side and he opens it up for the other side, I think we saw in 2016 what having a Jimmy Gilbert does for a defense and for the defensive backfield. So he's a guy, Dayon Hayes, he's got enough size that conceivably he could be a guy that could play himself into draft talk if he had like 10 or more sacks on the season, something like that. So I don't know if that's one of the ones that Coach Prime is talking about or not, but certainly he's a guy, he's a guy in previous years probably would have been top 5, I think, were it not for some of the other guys we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and he's a 5th-year senior, and you see that. I know that you can only take so much from those summer one-on-ones, but when you watch him and BJ Green, the array of pass rush moves that those guys have in their tool belt, you can tell that those are guys that have really honed their craft over the last 4 years. Well,
and talking about the summer workouts reminds me also that they don't just help the defense. When Khalil Benson can go against Dayon Hayes in practice, he's going to get better. And he's not going to see many people much better in the pass rush on game day. So it helps us in more than just on game day with the pass rush. It helps us get our tackles to be better for when they face pass rush in real games. So it just pays off in so many ways to have guys like this. And plus, the intensity factor and the maturity of a 5th-year senior, he's got no more chances. He's got to make it happen this time. He's grown up. They're 22, 23, which is a whole different thing. And so, I think we're going to talk about in a different podcast about some of the things that give us hope about this season. And, a lot of these guys we brought in are much older, more seasoned guys than what we brought in last year. And Dayon Hayes is certainly one of those.
And another one comes in at number 8, and that is receiver Will Sheppard. I actually had him all the way up at 5th. William, you had him 6th, and Brian not as high on Will Sheppard, down at 19th. He's one of 4 receivers in the top 8 of this year's Top Buffs Countdown. So if it wasn't already clear that receiver is Colorado's biggest position of strength going into camp, I think this makes it crystal clear. But I like him at 6'3", 205, having that size for Shedeur to be able to target. One, you've got Jimmy Horn and LaJohntay Wester, smaller guys, and Travis Hunter has got some size, but Sheppard's that bigger target you can look to in the pass game.
Well, and he was extremely productive at Vanderbilt in the SEC, and he didn't get to go against Vanderbilt's secondary. He had to go against the others, and was very productive. And I really suspect that he's one of the guys that Coach Prime is thinking about in terms of possibly playing himself into the first round of the draft, because he's got that kind of ability. And you and I both had him in I had him at 6, you had him at 5, and Brian had him at 19, so a little bit of difference there. But I really think he certainly belongs in the top 10. I think he belongs higher than where he is, but I think he's a guy that he's also a guy that nobody's really talked about this summer.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that makes him an underrated guy or just people don't know exactly what he's done before, what he brings to the program. But Will Sheppard is one of those guys that would have been our best receiver in most of the last 10 years.
Yeah. No question. And it's a great story. He put up big stats in high school, but he didn't have any power conference offers outside of Vanderbilt. So that's where he ends up going. And he started each of the 35 games he played in there. So he played a lot of football.
Against really good secondaries.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, he hits the portal because he's looking for an opportunity.
Right.
Last year of eligibility, I need more eyeballs on me. I need to market my game a little bit.
Yeah.
And you start looking at your options, and catching balls from Shedeur Sanders is a good idea.
Well, isn't that like, you would think that's one of the top recruiting pitches at Colorado right now is you want to get seen. You ain't getting seen more anywhere in the country than here.
Yeah. And so he was a 4-star transfer, double-digit Power 4 offer, so he finally got that attention that he didn't get as a high school recruit. All right, up to number 7 on this year's Top Buffs Countdown, and it's another receiver, Jimmy Horn Jr. I had him 9th, you had him 12th. William and Brian had him at 6th. I think that he's, by all accounts, gotten better this offseason. Now, It just comes down to the drops, right? I think that was the one issue with him last year.
And they weren't egregious. I mean, there were some, but for the most part, he made big plays. So it's not like he, I remember in that 2016 team, we had a couple of guys who had drop issues, and they kind of got it fixed for that season. But coming into that season, they didn't have the kind of production that Jimmy Horn did. And it's kind of interesting to me in our voting that Brian and I are kind of swapped on how we placed Jimmy Horn and Will Sheppard. I had him up in the teens, and that's not to say that I'm not high on Jimmy Horn, because I think he's a great player, but I just think we got so many receivers. As I was doing this thing, I was like, man, can I put 4 receivers in the top 10? So I also think that Jimmy Horn he's a great story, and let's see, before I even say it, it gets me emotional. Mm-hmm. One of the great moments of last season was right before that catch against CSU when Coach Prime said, "Hey, your dad's watching. Go do this for him." Yeah.
That was an awesome moment, and one of the great things that documentary does is it shares Jimmy Horn Jr.'s story with the world, and it's last year to the productivity that he already had. He was just the 8th player in CU history to have at least 58 catches and 6 touchdowns in the same season, and was the first since Laviska Shenault did that back in 2018. So he was productive last year. It was just maybe a couple of those drops here and there that made him, not fully reach his potential. But I got to think there's very few people that are as motivated in that building as Jimmy Horn Jr. when you see Will Sheppard come in and Cordell Russell and LaJohntay Wester, and he's going to get on the field. He's going to play a lot of football, but if he doesn't perform, he's not going to continue to.
Well, and I think he's also a guy that's got pride, and he hears it. I think he pays attention to things, and a lot of people are kind of sleeping on him and not necessarily writing him off so much as saying he's not going to get as much this season. And that's one of the benefits of being, the more talent you bring in, the harder guys got to work to be on top, right? So one guy makes another guy work harder, and we've been saying this all summer in these reports, these podcasts on this top 40 is a guy. Lots of guys that come back from last year. Is there going to be room to get any more stats? Because now they got to compete with even better guys, which makes the team better. So I'm excited to see what Jimmy Horn does. I think he's a real weapon, and I think people are sleeping on him if they think he's going to disappear.
Definitely. Up to number 6, and here is where safety Shiloh Sanders comes in. I had him 11th. William, you had him 5th. Brian 11th as well. Ranked as Colorado's second best defender by your favorite service, Pro Football Focus, in 2023, behind Travis Hunter.
Hold on now. They got me straightened out. They showed me how they are grading their offensive line, so I'm a little better about it. But
But he led the Buffs with 70 tackles over 11 games. This is where he really made the impact. The 4 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, and a pick 6 against Colorado State. I think the criticism there is sometimes he doesn't wrap up. The overall picture of it is he's an impact player for you.
Right.
And Cameron Stillman-Craig actually had 5 more missed tackles than Shiloh did last year. Right. And Trevor Woods had 1 more than him, too. So it's not like he was the only guy that missed some tackles last season.
Well, people get a perception, and that's what sticks with you no matter what the reality is. I think, I think Shiloh gets a little more grief than some of the other guys because of his last name. And people think, well, maybe he's playing because of who he is and not how good he is, and I don't think that's fair. I think in retrospect, as I'm looking back on it, when I think you guys probably were closer to right when you had him at 11 and I put him at 5, so I lifted him up a few spots. And I'm thinking in retrospect, I probably would have dropped him down a little bit, and probably right around 10 or so is probably where he belongs. But that's not taking a shot at his abilities. But the only thing about Shiloh for the next level, I think, is I'm not sure he's got the top end speed that some of them do.
Yeah, would you take the productivity that he had last year again this season, or do you expect more out of him?
Well, I think each year you should expect a little bit more, that you should improve and learn things and do things better than you did the previous year. So I don't think Shiloh's anywhere near the maximum of what he's capable of doing. So I think he should be improved this year, and we should see even more from him.
Well, they're going to put a lot on these corners.
Yeah.
They're going to be on an island.
Yeah.
But the good thing about that is I think the safeties are going to be a little bit freer to roam this year. That's something that Shiloh seems pretty excited about.
Well, I think that's a lot more fun for them, for like a guy like a Tedrick Thompson who could just roam the field and make plays and make interceptions and things like that. So I think that's much more exciting. And I think Shiloh likes to be the big hit guy, and he needs to kind of, I don't know, tone it down necessarily, but he needs to have better form to go along with it, And he got a lot of grief in the spring because he got run over by a high school kid.
But that was very entertaining. I can't wait to see more Michael Welch versus Shiloh Sanders in practice. At number 5 is offensive lineman Justin Mayers. I had him 7th. You had him 10th. Brian at 9.
And I'm gonna break in. I'm gonna say the only reason I rated him 10th was so I didn't look like a offensive line, favoritism guy.
Yeah, well, here's a good note here, William. 3 of the top 5 Buffs in this year's preseason countdown are newcomers.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah.
You've upgraded your top-end talent.
Right.
And so, Justin Mayers was a very heavily pursued offensive lineman in the portal after playing in 35 games at UTEP. This is probably the most has the best odds of being drafted next April out of those guys at this point? Maybe.
I think, given the fact that he's got that starting position, I think Tyler Johnson maybe has better measurables, but in terms of the guards, we start talking about, Khalil Benson at tackle. I think he's got the measurables at that position. And obviously, you're going to have a higher draft status as a tackle than a guard with the way they draft players in the NFL. But Justin Mayers is the real deal. He is an Andre Giroud, Chris Nioli type of offensive guard, nasty and big and physical. And he's not going to get moved on the pass rush. He's got lots of experience, lots of really good technique. And of those 3 guards that are fighting for those 3 spots, I think I think at this point he's the best of the 3, although Tyler Johnson may have the highest ceiling down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to say Tyler Johnson's not going to start or Tyler Brown's not going to start.
Right.
But it would be even harder to fathom that if Justin Mayers is healthy, that opener against North Dakota State, he's got to be out there.
Yeah, and it may end up being, if you're sometimes as an offensive line coach, and this is a nice problem to have, maybe one of those three guys ends up at the center if he thinks that makes a better situation than Zelinskas or Walker. So you play around with your combinations of five guys, and you try to get the best combination going of those five that play well together. So we'll see how it plays out. I think we're fairly solid at the two tackle spots as far as who's going to be the starters, but those interior three, man, somebody's going to be on the sidelines that would otherwise be a starter on most teams.
Yeah, and that would be a huge sales pitch for Phil Lodeholt going forward if Mayers indeed has a great season and gets drafted.
Right.
You can say this is the blueprint.
Right.
You follow what Justin Mayers did coming up from a UTEP, get your name put out there, and you get exposure and get drafted.
Or Tyler Johnson, or quite frankly, I think Khalil Benson has a shot at getting drafted if he has a solid season too. So, if he puts a couple of guys into the draft this year, even at lower rounds, all of a sudden you go out and you say, look, you know what? I turn these guys into NFL guys. You come here and I'll make you one too.
Yeah. I'm excited about number 4, LaJohntay Wester. I had him third. You had him third. Brian had him 12. He is going to break some ankles out there on Folsom Field this fall.
My top 3 when I started this list, I had the top 4. My top 4 didn't even have to look at anything. He was number 3, and Chidozie Nwankwo was number 4 for me. And there was just no question marks about it, because I think LaJohntay Wester, there was all the talk about Shedeur and Travis, and I think if LaJohntay Wester was just a little bit taller, he'd certainly be almost an automatic first-round draft pick kind of a guy that you'd look at. If he has the kind of season that we both expect, he may be one anyway, because he can do it all, and he's just one of those electric guys, like a Ben Kelly or I don't know, James Kidd comes to mind for some reason. Those kinds of really fast, really shifty little guys.
Yeah. We got a glimpse of it in the spring game, too.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a lot of that. Just the fluidity that he plays the game with is a thing of beauty.
Right. And I think teams are going to come out and they're going to try to match up their best guys on Travis Hunter and on Will Sheppard and Jimmy Horn. And, at least early in the season, they may forget about this guy. Now, they won't forget about him for long, and I don't see how we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I don't see how North Dakota State has anybody that can cover these guys.
Yeah. I've been asked with some national radio interviews who's the guy that is going to emerge, and with no hesitation. You said you had no hesitation with your top 4. I have no hesitation in saying LaJohntay Wester is a name that you will be aware of in a couple months.
Well, and I would go so far as to say that, he might be in the Heisman talk too. It's not crazy to think that we could have 3 guys.
Well, he's going to have to make some big plays as a punt returner.
Yeah.
I think that's what would make him kind of
right. And I think if you're really killing it at wide receiver and you get a couple of touchdowns on punt returns, all of a sudden everybody's looking at you, and now you're sort of every time they drop back to punt, what's going to happen now? Kind of a guy.
If you see LaJohntay in street clothes, though, you're probably not going to think he's on the football team.
At Jeremy Bloom, you never would have thought, looking at him, in the library, that kid plays football, right?
This guy looks like a football player. Number 3, B.J. Green. You could list him as a defensive tackle or an edge guy because he's going to do both. Consummate professional. Another great story. Former walk-on, goes to Arizona State, and he was one of the best pass rushers in the country last season.
Yeah, and he did it in the Pac-12 against good competition. Really was dominant on the outside, and the thing about him, he's sort of a guy with his production from last year. You would be thinking, early round draft pick, but he's just sort of one of the tweener sizes at the 6'2", 270. But you can use him in so many different ways. I think if he proves that he's got the speed rush and he can do that kind of thing, that I think the NFL, somebody's going to take a chance on this guy. And if he has the kind of production this year or better, I think he might have better production this year. He's certainly going to get drafted as well. And just a question of where, because I think he's the kind of guy they're not going to love him at the combine because they love their measurables and they want him to be 6'4", and they want him to do this, that, and the other thing. But he's a guy that just shows up and plays and makes things happen, And the other thing, you watch him play, he's really good with his hands. He's really good at getting tackles' hands off of him, which is everybody. People tend to think that like a really good speed rusher has speed. Well, frankly, the more important thing for a speed rusher is hands. You get to get those tackles' hands down off of you. And I was watching a video recently of some offensive tackles talking about how he keeps their hands off of his hands. And it's a hand battle on the edge. And people don't think about that in terms of a guy like B.J. Green. And I think he's a guy, when people are talking about us with only 6 wins, I'm like, with him and Dayon Hayes on the edges – and the other guys we got, I'm not sure how teams are going to face us.
Yeah. Going back to his size, it's a good thing he is 6'1", because if he wasn't, he'd be in the NFL right now, right? I think if he was 6'3", 6'4", he would have parlayed last year's success and gone to the NFL. So I like those guys that play with leverage, wank well. Guys that have like that wrestling background, because a lot of most of the time in football, the low man wins. Now, it's nice to have Jimmy Gilbert with his length off the edge, but when you talk about a guy that can play multiple techniques, and he can be just a real disruptor, and I think his leverage actually plays to his advantage, and especially in college.
Well, and I think one thing you just said is really going to play. He's got a chip on his shoulder because they're saying, you can't play at the next level because you're not tall enough. Oh, really? Well, let me show you. So, again, he's got that last season to show and prove what he's going to do. And the other thing about B.J. Green that sort of stands out, and I don't know if people know this, is how smart he is and how how far along he is in his education and all that kind of thing. And was it aerospace engineering?
Yeah.
I mean, for God's sake, So the joke has always been, I don't know if it's really a joke, jokes are based on some reality, is that the offensive linemen are the smart guys and the defensive linemen are what? And not this kid. Because he's as smart as he is good. And I think that chip on his shoulder and that something to prove is something that he and Nwank will both have because of their height, and it's going to drive them to really excel this year, and they know that they need to have big seasons to move on to the next level.
And it's been fun to see Warren Sapp working with B.J. Green as well.
Yeah.
Did you see the video where he talked about how he loves that B.J. Green knows how to work in a phone booth? And Warren Sapp said, who else worked in a phone booth? Superman.
Yeah.
That's a nice tutor for B.J. Green to have his last year of college football.
And Nwankwo and all those guys. And if people don't know what you mean by working in a phone booth, if you think about you're going one-on-one with an offensive guard or an offensive tackle, you're up close and it's hand fighting, and there's nowhere where you can really go. If you run out of the phone booth, you can't get to the quarterback because he's too far away. So, especially the interior positions. The nice thing about B.J. Green is you can, if depending on what you want to do on defense, you could line him up just about anywhere. You could line him up over the center in a third and long situation, and he's going to be able to handle that sort of situation.
Yeah. All right, you ready for the top 2?
I think so.
At number 2 on this year's Top Buffs countdown, second year in a row he's coming at number 2.
I think it's a travesty. Go ahead.
Athlete Travis Hunter. So I'm not going to speak too much here. I'm going to throw it to you, but let me just set it up here. I had him second. Brian had him second. But, William, you thought that Travis Hunter should have been number 1. Now, last year, if you remember, I had him 1, whereas you and Brian had him 2. And so I'm curious what's changed to make you want to have him number 1 on the countdown this year.
I saw him. I saw him. It's coming into last year. It was a lot of he hadn't played the full season the year before, and it was at a lower level anyway. And so you thought to yourself, I'm not 100% sold that he's going to be able to do it at this level. And then from the first game against TCU, that one play, that's just crazy. Nobody can do that. Yeah. And then he did it over and over again. And then the other thing, so my position on this is. This is the top 40 players on the team, right? He's the best player on the team. There's no argument about it. Okay? Now, if this was the most important player on the team, Absolutely, it's Shedeur Sanders, no question about it. But the best football player on this team, probably the best football player in America, is Travis Hunter, because he can do a variety of different things. Shedeur is going to be a first-round draft pick as a quarterback, but Travis Hunter can play cornerback, wide receiver, returner,
nickelback.
Going to see him do that this year. I suspect he's the kind of guy, if you put him in at running back, and he'd have a big game there too.
Yeah.
So I think he's the best football player on the team, and there's just no question about it. So it comes down to, are we ranking the most important to the team or the best player on the team, in my view.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Again, I had Travis Hunter number one on my list last year. And actually, I'm glad that both years it wasn't unanimous in terms of who was number one, because I think there is a real discussion to be had, like you're talking about the best player versus the most important. And I don't like to put a whole lot of rules on the voting for this list, because it's fun to see people's different interpretation and the way that they vote. And then what happens is you put 3 votes together, and it usually comes out in a good spot, you know? And so, I for a lot of the reasons you said there was why Adam won last year. Now, why, I guess it's no spoiler at this point that Shedeur Sanders is number one.
You should have said Charlie Offerdahl, man. We could have had fun with it.
But I get a lot of respect for Shedeur watching him. Like you said, you watched Travis Hunter, and that's how you felt that way. We watched Shedeur Sanders get knocked down time after time after time. And he had to be frustrated, but he never threw his teammates under the bus. When Travis Hunter got a cheap shot on him, the one guy that had his back as a leader on offense was Shedeur Sanders. Whether or not you like the off-the-field stuff, that's just a taste preference.
But let me ask you about it. What's the off-the-field stuff? He doesn't really do anything off the field. I mean, he buys flashy cars. Well, he can afford to do it. So what? He's not getting in trouble. He's not getting arrested. He's not out there. I guess he said the one thing about that one guy that transferred. But so what? Is that an off-the-field thing, or he's just sort of, he's responding on a tweet? I don't really understand that whole off-the-field thing, because I don't see it that much.
Well, he's under the microscope.
Yeah.
And like at Big 12 Media Days, he made a comment that we're everybody's Super Bowl. Well, they are. Look at the TV ratings. And he catches flack for that. Right. And if another quarterback, maybe they would, where everybody's Super Bowl is kind of a headline grabber. I think maybe other people would have, but he gets scrutinized for things. Right. I guess I would say that the thing that he got criticized for this offseason was the comment on the Athletic article where he said, well, he was mid at best, talking about Xavier Smith. I think that was the thing that a lot of people ran with this offseason. But
I don't think he ever says anything in a malicious way. He's just telling the truth.
And that was the truth.
He's just telling the truth, and frankly, I credit him, and I think that shows integrity to me. This is what I think. You asked me, I'm going to answer the question. Now, that's how I've always been. I got a new boss coming in November. He asked me questions, I'm going to answer him. Honestly. And so I look at the whole thing with Shedeur, and he's not out there going, hey, I'm the greatest. Look at me. Look how great I am. I've not ever remembered him talking about himself. And so everything he just says is a response to somebody else's statement, asking him a question, and he tells the truth. But like you, he had every reason to be in the faces of his offensive linemen last year, and I don't remember seeing it happen.
Yeah. No, he was asked many times about the offensive line, and he just said, "Look, I'm not doing that. I'm not playing that game."
Yeah. Now, I always suspected he went into his dad's office after some games and said,
well, he didn't even need to do that because his dad already saw it, right? Like the rest of us in the country. That's another thing. I like that Coach Prime has had a little pushback on. It was the UCLA game where it was just. I think any optimism that group was going to get fixed last season was out the window. You just knew that was a mess, and he admitted that, and he was asked in the post-game press conference, what are you going to do there? And he said, get new players. Again, all he's doing is saying things that are honest.
Right.
And then, of course, he got flack for that. And I've loved that Coach Prime this offseason a couple times, he's come into the press conference room with us and say, why is it that you guys can say it, but I can't? Right. Everybody's seeing this happen out there.
Right.
And so that's how the Sanders family operates. I like it, but it certainly draws negativity from folks nationally.
And the fun part is they don't change. I mean, he may, Prime may come to you and say, how come I can't say it? But he's still going to say it because he's going to tell you the truth. You ask him a question, he's going to tell you the truth. And he's also a guy who remembers things, okay?
Yeah.
And he's going to call you out on it if you said something before, and he's going to come back and say, well, how about now? So I think, Shedeur is a chip off the old block, and I like it. I like having a quarterback I'm not sure which parts of the anatomy I'm allowed to say, but who's got guts, okay? Who's got warrior in him, who's got fight in him. Last one we had took us to 10 wins.
Yeah. With Shedeur, his stats, it's going to be more of an efficiency thing we're looking for from him. Now, his completion percentage was really good last year.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many more. I don't think he's going to get more passing attempts. You're going to just want to see more yards per attempt out of him because obviously you want to have a more balanced offense. And I think, when you have less pressure on you, the less checkdowns you have to do.
Right.
And so you'll be able to hopefully stretch the field a little bit more this year if you're him.
Yeah, and it's it's a little bit difficult to see the field when you got BJ Green in your face or any of those guys, right? And so you get better protection, you've got a better opportunity to see the field, and with the embarrassment of riches he's going to have at receiver this year, somebody's going to come open, and I think we got some guys that are going to get over the top on some people. I think we got some guys who can catch it on the run and make something out of it. I think we got a tight end that can give them at least as much as what we had last year. So I think we're going to have a running game that's going to be effective this year too. So I think I think our ability to throw the ball is going to be, kind of like PlayStation, quite frankly.
He's going to be the first Buff quarterback drafted into the NFL since Coy Detmer in 1997.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited that streak of futility is actually finally going to come to an end.
Well, it's crazy, I mean, even CSU's had a couple of guys, haven't they? I think it's like
I would assume so. That's what is that? That's going to be the 25 draft. So you're talking 28 years.
Yeah, just by accident. Just, like a BJ Green shows up by accident as a walk-on, turns out to be a player, right? Just by accident, somebody should have been an NFL-level quarterback in the last 25 years. It's frankly unbelievable, and then the next thing is to, get the next one and keep the string going. But
it probably should have been Steven Montez, right, with his physical tools.
Yeah,
that was always a perplexing player when he was in Colorado's program.
Well, I don't think he was as dedicated to the game as he needed to be, and he just didn't have that. I don't know. You talk about instinct in sports and sixth sense or whatever. Guys who can hit a baseball, for example. It's not you can't see a baseball from the time it's pitched. Okay, it's about your perception. And a middle linebacker like a Nate Landman, you can't teach that. You have that or you don't have that, and we just haven't had. And Steven Montez just didn't have that. He had the golden arm, but he just didn't have the instincts and the understanding of the game of a quarterback.
Well, that's it for the 2024 Top Buffs Countdown. It was fun, and I think we've still got too much to talk about with Colorado leading up to preseason camp. So let's end this podcast and let's hit record again and talk about some of these storylines. As we lead up to preseason camp.
Plenty to do, and we'll have to see if what people think about the whole top 40 and did we leave anybody out that should have been in there or anything like that.
Yeah, give us some feedback, and we appreciate you guys out there for tuning into this year's Top Buffs Countdown. Again, we're going to be back with a Colorado Camp Primer up next.